I'm sure you find it more exhausting.
Oh no, I find it very interesting. It energizes me.
I see.
Can you talk for a while about, well, before this, talk for a little while about your experience with Bernard Shaw and your experience in the theater and what part that has played in your life and your work now.
That's an interesting matter you've suddenly brought up. I don't think it was on the list.
It wasn't, but you talked about it this morning and it got me excited, so I brought it in.
You see, in a certain sense, you must realize that when I studied with certain people, all of those people that I studied with, and I was very, very, very much a youth. I mean, I was terribly young, I was a child. When I studied with them, they were the great thinkers of the day, the really great thinkers. And they were all, one and all, looked upon as arrant cranks, except by the few who were very observant. Naturally, to a child, with all one's other children in association at schools and colleges, and all knowing that you are studying under a crank, makes it very difficult. Therefore, at that period, I, as it were, went behind a curtain, hid myself. I used to go to certain places in nature, particularly over the Dorset coast, where I would live entirely on my own for months. And out of all of that, also because that all of my background of the garden led me equally into what you would call myth and fable and parable and fairy stories equally, and secret stories. All of that led me into a world of lights and shadows. Now that led me instantly, for at the age of 4, it must have been, I was taken to London to a performance of Maeterlinck's Bluebird. Now Maeterlinck was undoubtedly one of the great mystical magicians of his period. There was no greater. I was absolutely wiped inside out by the Bluebird. I didn't recover from it. They took me home. I don't suppose I ate. I didn't sleep. I lived the Bluebird for months. And then there must have been other things that followed that, there were, but that one had already eclipsed me. It wasn't only the performance of Maeterlinck's Bluebird with people flying as birds, it was also the whole secrecy of the place, that there had been a hall that I'd come into full of people, including my governess, the German Fräulein and relatives, and huge masses of people in London. And there were all these people with all these lights, and suddenly it all went out into darkness. And everything in the place was dark, and then there was music. And my ears started to sing. And then gradually there was a partition, a curtain, parted and rose, and there was some vague light, and something started to happen, all in another world. And the whole of that world proceeded for 2.5 hours and carried me right out of this world. And suddenly it all closed down and ended, and all the lights came on, and I was back in myself again. But it had happened. I'd gone. I'd gone right out. I'd found another world. I'd entered the theatre. And now I knew something that I wanted to give people, something that was hidden inside me, that I forever wanted to give people, and that if you left all the lights on and the doors open and the windows open, you couldn't give it to anybody. It didn't happen. And so the magic of the theatre began. And my people, my parents, of course, because of my birth, did not permit me to go into the theatre. It was refuted. At the age of 22, I wrote over all my possessions, all my money, my properties, everything I possessed. I wrote it away, and I went to London to the greatest maestro of the time, Elsie Fogarty, the greatest teacher of elocution, of drama, of deportment, of all of those arts, at the Albert Hall. And she gave me an interview. And my God, I don't know. I don't know. What could we do with it? What is there possible that we could do with it? I don't know. And there I was thinking I spoke King's English, this and that and everything else. And eventually she said, well, I understand that you've given everything up, that you have no means. I'll take you on, I'll try. And so I studied, and I worked, and I worked, and I worked. And so I entered, and I discovered in this huge miracle in the classic theatre that in a sense it comes next door to the huge position of religion. That you can, if 1,000 people can actually sit in an auditorium, imbibe, and tomorrow and forever after be that much lifted from where they were before, in everything that they see can be tainted with a colour and an infusement. Do you follow? So that to me is the classic theatre. That concerns authors and playwrights and the theatre. And of course it includes music and painting in its own way. Here again I'm describing the support that all artifice is to the garden. But I still cannot but perceive that the whole art of the garden is the acme of it all, is the great leadership, the bringer about of it, the instigator. I also feel that it is probably only the classic theatre in its true sense, such a play as Prohibited, which is no longer understood or understandable to people, or even such a performance as Psyché, Amore Psyché. I still believe that it is possible that such a dramatic incident can restore the people at large to a vision of life again that could immediately undo and work the miracle that we've been talking about.
I'm glad that you tried that. That was good. I'm glad that you tried to answer that, even though I apologize. It wasn't on the list, but we got to it somehow this morning. And
yes, I know.
I was interested.
Yes.
How do you feel about what John Jevons is doing with your work, his approaches?
So interesting is this. You see, I went with John. He asked me to go over. He came to Santa Cruz and saw the garden. And he said, we've been offered a bit of land. Will you come over with me and have a look at it? I went over, and of course there was nothing worse. There was nothing worse that you could have gone to, literally, on this earth. If you went to the middle of the Sahara, it really couldn't have been much worse. And we stood on it, and I said, well, it couldn't be worse, so here you are, do it. Because here's going to be the exemplative. If you can do it here, the answer to the whole world is, it doesn't matter who comes up and says, but you had soil. You could say, oh, did we? And so the answer is, you've got nothing in your favour to begin with. He was undoubtedly an indomitable character. We did a certain amount of planning. I suggested a little bit of this, suggested a little bit of that. I had very little influence, but he perceived the techniques. He looked into them at Santa Cruz heavily, saw how they were done, learned how they were done, and through some of my students got them over there and followed it, and became so wildly excited at the results immediately that, like everybody, you must be careful how you either mention this to him or to the public even, lost his head a little. And lost his head to the degree of wanting to talk always again about quantitatives, the result of the profit that could be got out of it, over what this did. You see, everybody today is trying to compete with the huge agricultural machine. No good trying to compete with the huge... agricultural machine at all. No good trying to. You've got to go on your own classic legs, on your own classic tempo. You've got to be positive, not merely oppose a negative. So I was a little bit worried, for he was always doing calculations of how many 100 radish you could produce on 4x4 if you gave them so much wood ash, so much manure, and this and that. And then continually he got his figures a bit mixed up and made some miscalculations and had to re-put them, and people got a little bit worried. But all the time he was succeeding. His students were with him, they were all excited. The whole thing worked in a plus from beginning onwards. Excellent. Just recently he has brought out his new book. Now his book before, which I read, I didn't write to him about it or say anything. I read it, and it was a kind of huge arithmetical log of when to sow this, how to get the utmost out of it, and how to amalgamate this plant with this plant, and don't put that plant with that plant, and full of good sense. This time he's printed a book, and he has begun it in the right place. He has put nature as the queen. Nature is the seat of the law. And now Palo Alto is obedient and reverent. And now they're up the right street. And now they're leading into a huge entity. And they're making it very simple. And the little man who's got a window box in New York, or the little man who's got 20 feet by 20 feet in a dirty, smelly plot where a bus fumes blows over it, is discovering how to grow things and compete. And I think he's doing a huge, miraculous job.
You think the garden changed John Jevons?
Why don't you ask John Jevons that? It must have done. All gardens change everybody, instantly.
Can you elaborate a little more on what you mean by the phrase, it's not the gardener who makes the garden, but the garden which makes the gardener?
Gardens are forever. Gardens are the creation of God. We as physical beings come and go, as physical beings. Therefore we must enter the garden humbly. You must go in the garden gate frontwards and you must go out backwards. I had the perfect answer